My lesson tonight is about patience, so bear with me. David, face. All right, but seriously, I've been reflecting on patience a lot lately, and come to find that it's very powerful. And so, for instance, like with patience, you can train up a child. You can save up an inheritance for your children's children, perhaps. You could complete a difficult car repair. That's actually a picture of my weekend last Saturday. That's a power steering pump for a 2004 Honda Civic. And the bearing was bad, and the whole thing was about to go, when the shaft doesn't stay in place, you got a problem. So I replaced the bearing, but then other parts fell out of place, and then I was like, oh no, got to reassemble parts I wasn't ready to assemble. And then YouTube had all different kinds of pumps that weren't the same. Anywho, I reassembled that pump 4 times before it worked. So it's a test of patience. Keep taking it apart, rebuilding it. Anywho, have you ever considered how your faith in God's providence affects your patience? I'll talk more about that later. Patience is a fruit of the Spirit. Many of us probably are aware. In Galatians 5:22, we read, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, and patience," along with the rest. We also read in Proverbs 25, verse 15, "With patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone." So you can persuade someone of power with patience, which in Hebrew, when they translate that to patience, the literal words, it's long anger. Long anger is kind of what it is behind that word patience. Means you're slow to anger, or you don't get mad for a long time when you've been wronged. In 1 Corinthians 13, we read that agape love is patient and that it endures all things. And so, we as Christians are supposed to exhibit this love, right? And so even when someone does you wrong, your response is supposed to be, "I love you." And your actions have to show it. You don't just say it. So it's not an easy task, to say the least. I've been trying to grow in my patience. After all, it's a fruit of the Spirit. And I would tell you, I think it's a worthy endeavor, and I highly recommend it, like trying to grow it. You have to try, the want to, right? With the fruits of the Spirit, you have to want it. But I also wanted to make sure, especially since I'm presenting on it tonight or talking about it, that my understanding of what is biblical patience, is it the same thing that I think patience is? So I did a little bit of digging, I'm no biblical scholar, Greek, person, but I looked into the Greek. So there's 2 words, that are translated patience and endurance. So I did look up how to say them. Makrothumia, and hupomeno. So makrothumia is made up of 2 root words, makros, which is long, thumos, which is passion or anger. So it's kind of like that Hebrew, what I was talking about earlier, is similar in that way, right? Long passion or long anger are the roots. In the word help studies that I like, look at them on Bible Hub when I'm trying to look at the Greek. It says, if in English we had an adjective long-tempered as a counterpart to short-tempered, we talk about people being short-tempered, then makrothumia would be called the quality of being long-tempered. And that's actually also, as we know, a quality of God, slow to anger. And so, I also looked in, Thayer's, so, it's translated patience, endurance, constancy, steadfastness, perseverance, just trying to wrap my head around, okay, what does this mean? But especially as these qualities are shown when you're dealing with troubles or problems, right? Some passages that use this makrothumia, actually we just had one in 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, right? But a couple more. I, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling which you have been called, with all humility, gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. So it's tied to love again, that agape love. So we're called to be patient, a patient people. Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. And then in Hebrews chapter 6, we read that you should not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, I figured I'd jump into hupomeno real quick. Because patience and endurance they're interlinked a lot of times. How can you have long anger if you cannot endure anything, right? And so hupomeno is remaining under a load, or bearing up, or enduring, right? Or perseverance, as we often might call it too, is another word. Yeah, in Thayer's we have to remain, to abide, persevere, endure, bear bravely and calmly. So it's a good attribute, right? In one passage that I chose for hupomeno is Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And so we are called to run the race of this life with endurance, or of a faithful life with endurance. And then just looking to Jesus, who did the same thing, who, for the joy that he knew was coming, he endured the cross, which is worse than what we have to endure. So we have the example of Christ there with the endurance and the perseverance. So where do we go from here? Well, I had mentioned how trusting in God's providence is related to our patience. So my last passage is in James chapter 5. It's up on the screen, James 5, 7 through 11. We read, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it, until it receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful." That's a lot of words. If I was going to reduce that to my own paraphrase or summary, oh, my pages are all out of order. I was going to rely on my notes. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, here we go. So James calls us to be like a farmer, to be patient like a farmer, waiting for his crop to grow because the Lord is coming, waiting on the Lord to come. It's going to be a glorious day. In the suffering, though, while we're here, we know that we're in the broken world, we're going to suffer. He calls us to remain steadfast, so enduring under that load of whatever burdens come your way, what trials. And then he also talks about Job. He says, you've seen God's purpose in Job. You know, the curtain was peeled back in that. You could see how God works. And so there's a call to trust in God's purpose in suffering and in trials. And we know that God is over all, and he made all things. He's in control. He reigns. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And I'm reminded of Joseph. I just couldn't help it. But when he spoke to his brothers in Egypt, he said, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and for your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke to them kindly. And so I guess I'm not trying to say that in this life everything's going to be good all the time. It won't. That's not what I'm trying to say, because that's not what God teaches. That's not what it is. But I guess what I'm trying to say is let me back up. We can't understand or wrap our heads around the plans of God. Like, Joseph didn't know that when he was sitting in prison, that he was going to be exalted to second to Pharaoh, and then he was going to do all the things he did, and he didn't know all that. And it hasn't been revealed to us what will happen, not the details of our lives. And it's too much for our minds to handle anyway, the plans of God, right? He's everywhere, he sees everything and processes everything that's happening and controls all the things. I can hardly control myself, right? So I don't worry about that. Glad I don't have to worry about everything. And so we just have to give it up to God, right? And to trust him. So we put faith in his providence. And when things go awry, or so we think they're awry, we can trust that our good, loving, compassionate, and merciful Father in heaven is in control. And beyond all that, we know what God has promised in his word. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing me will never die. And in Romans 1, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. So the best is yet to come if we will obey God and live faithfully. But to do so requires patience and endurance. So my prayer for us all is that we would grow in our patience, our makrathumia, our long-temperedness, so to speak, our long anger, that we would persevere in the trials of this life until one day when we join the Lord in heaven. Thank you for your patience. There may be someone here tonight who has not yet been buried with Christ in baptism. And if you have realized the need to obey this command of baptism and to obey the Lord, and you want to serve him with your life, serve him faithfully, we would love to baptize you for the remission of your sins. Or if you just need prayers of the congregation, whatever you need, we invite you to come forward to the front while we stand and sing.